Okay, so if you, or if Mimi hadn't really thought about it, because Mimi forgets things sometimes, if I knew, I forgot. But our main character in our story, Alexander Graham Bell, is not growing up in the United States of America, where some of you are listening to me. Some of you are listening to me possibly in other countries, but my grandchildren, whom I usually read for, are in the United States of America. And you, grandchildren, know that they said London, right? So our main character, Alec, or Alexander Graham Bell, is going to go to London. And London is in England. So look on your world map and find London, England. Okay, here we go with Chapter 5. The Great Adventure. Chapter 5 of The Talking Wire, the story of Alexander Graham Bell. London? At Grandpapa's? Me? Professor Bell had just told Alec of his grandfather's offer, and Alec could scarcely believe his ears. London? He repeated incredulously. When am I to go? As soon as you can get ready, replied Professor Bell. You're a lucky boy. I wish I had had the chance. Grandpapa is going to teach you. He has been a schoolmaster all his life, and you'll have to settle down to work for him. Alec could hardly take it in. London! London, that every boy longs to see. 50 great cities rolled into one and doubled twice over. Alec had dreamed of it, and now his dream had come true. London, 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 the name sang in his ears. And then they have two lines from a song, which I won't sing because I don't know the tune, but it says, Oh, London holds the hearts of men, and London's paved with gold. That's not true, is it? But it was an idea of how wonderful and fancy and great London was. He would have to study Latin, no escape from that. But who would teach him? Grandpapa. Had Grandpapa a piano? What would he do all day long when Grandpapa was away? And Sunday? If only Melly and Ted could go with him. The boy is dreaming, said his father, and no wonder. He's beginning to grow up. We'll see what London will do for him. Preparations were made for the journey and for the long winter in London, and to the boy it seemed as if time were standing still. That means he couldn't wait, right? He was so excited. But at length the appointed day came. It was a long journey for a 14-year-old boy to take, even if his father went with him, and Alec was glad when it came to an end. It was getting dark when the train pulled into Euston Station. The lights, the noise, the crowds, the cries of the station porters and cabbies were bewildering, but on a sudden his grandfather pushed his way through the crowd. He engaged a hansom cab, and away they went, with Alec's box beside the driver and the horse's hoofs clanking sharply on the cobblestones. Then, almost before they knew it, the cab drew up at 18 Harrington Square. Then there was supper and bed and a tinge of homesickness as he fell asleep. This was London, and for Alec it was a great adventure, the first great adventure of his life. It was not the habit of Grandfather Bell to put off the tasks that had to be faced, and as soon as Alec's father had set out for home, he took the boy in hand. But before making a beginning with his studies, he took Alec to his tailor to have him outfitted with new clothes that were less rough and coarse than those loose tweeds that the boy had been wearing. The new tight-fitting trousers made the boy feel utterly uncomfortable. Grandfather and Grandpapa insisted that he should be fitted out also with an Eton jacket and a top hat. But what Alec hated most was that he must carry a cane and wear gloves every time he went out. Across from the house at 18 Harrington Square was a small park known as the Harrington Gardens, open only to the residents of the square who had keys to it, and here Alec was forced to parade for a certain time each day to satisfy the pride of the old schoolmaster. Alec felt a genuine affection for his grandfather, but to the end of a long life he recalled the misery which he had suffered from these new clothes during his first weeks in London. Alexander Bell was methodical and thorough in the extreme, and Alec found from the very first day that his studies and his pleasures alike were planned to the minutest detail. Grandpapa was dismayed to find out how little the boy really knew. He had only a smattering of Latin and less Greek, and Grandpapa Bell had to begin at the first and drill the boy on his Latin grammar. The old schoolmaster took him in charge and taught him how to study. Grandfather, wrote Alec many years later, made me realize that I was grossly ignorant of the ordinary subjects of study that every schoolboy should know. He made me ashamed of this ignorance and aroused in me the ambition to remedy my defects of education by personal study. When Grandfather Bell first thought of having Alec come to London, the thought that he had in mind was that he might teach the boy to read and recite. After all, he said to himself, the boy was named after me. He is Alexander III, and he ought to be interested in the study of speech. Alec, the old schoolmaster resolved, should be a teacher, like his father and his grandfather before him, and in any case, practice in reading could do him no harm. Back in the 1860s, in the days before the phonograph and the radio and moving pictures, and before the motor car was invented, now you'll have to go and study what all those words mean, won't you, children? Reading and reciting was a common form of entertainment, not only at public entertainments, but at school concerts and church socials and in private homes. So there was no TV or even radio, no movies, obviously no cell phones, right? No internet. And the phonograph, you wouldn't even know what that was probably called if you knew the modern term, but the modern term is a record player. No program was complete without recitations or dialogues, and young people took lessons in voice training and elocution so that they might acquit themselves creditably in public. To make a recitation go over with the audience, the performer studied what attitudes and gestures were most effective and paid special attention to inflection and enunciation and modulation of the voice. Alec had an unusually fine voice. He had learned to pronounce his vowel sounds, to watch for his O's and A's and R's, and his father had taught him to enunciate clearly. Enunciation, that was the important thing, more important even than pronunciation. He had learned to speak in crisp, clear tones. When Grandpapa thought that Alec was far enough advanced to profit by it, he took the boy into his own classes so that he might see and hear for himself how to deal with defects of speech and how to read in public. And Alec listened once again to the old favorites, which he had so often heard his father recite. Horatius at the bridge, the part about Astor and the place where the bridge went splashing down into the Tiber, and the charge of the Light Brigade. Everyone was reciting that. And there were stories in prose that he liked. The Lark at the Diggings, and the Christmas Carol, and the famous trial scene from Warren Hastings, and half a hundred more. And Shakespeare. Alec knew some of the great speeches by heart, but there was one in particular that was a special favorite of Grandpapa's. To be or not to be, when Hamlet was contemplating taking his own life. To be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take up arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing in them, to die, to sleep no more. Grandfather had studied every word and phrase so as to give each line its proper shade of meaning, and when he recited it, Alec was greatly moved. I want you to learn that, said Grandpapa. You'll never be sorry, and some day you may be very glad. To be or not to be, neither Alec nor Grandpapa Bell could foresee that a day would come in Alec's life when this question would be put in circumstances so very, very different from these. It took Alec some weeks to learn it well enough to please his taskmaster, that means his teacher, but at length Grandpapa said, That'll do just now, but we'll go over it again later on. You must recite it for your father when he comes to London again. And that page is the picture that I'll have on the cover of this chapter's recording. Page 32 continues. But there was much else to do in London that was an education for the boy, besides what his grandfather taught him. There were famous places to see, Westminster Abbey, the House of Commons, St. Paul's, Trafalgar Square, the Tower of London, and places where a boy could while away his time, such as the Zoo and Madame Tussauds, and the Horse Guards, and half a score of others. Alec could scarcely have lived in London for a whole year under Grandpapa's roof without having been taken to hear Spurgeon, the most popular preacher of the day. The great tabernacle in which he preached seated 6,000 people, and Spurgeon had preached elsewhere to as many as 10,000. Spurgeon was not yet 28. He had a clear and sympathetic voice which vibrated with emotion, and he moved his vast audience at will, from tears to laughter, and from laughter to tears. One of the sermons that Grandpapa Bell and Alec may have chanced to hear was entitled The New Song and the Old Story. He took for his text, O sing unto the Lord a new song. and his sermon was simple and a moving exhortation to his hearers to praise God in song. For Alec, who was more interested in human speech than anything else, there was one passage that might have seemed intended for him. The human voice, what a noble instrument it is, what a compass it has, its low, soft whispers, how they can hold us spellbound, its full volume, as it peals forth like thunder, how it can startle and produce dismay. Is not our tongue the glory of our frame? All the instruments that were ever devised by men are harsh and grating compared with the unparalleled sweetness of the human voice. This year which Alec spent in London had a lasting influence on his whole life. The year with my grandfather, he wrote years later, converted me from an ignorant and careless boy into a rather studious youth, anxious to improve his educational standing by his own exertions and fit himself for college. Do you know what an exertion is? Like your own hard work. But this was not all. Life in the great city was an education in itself. In London, he felt the heartbeat of the great world, its surging, thronging crowds, its busy life, its famous people and famous places, its romantic story, all left their impression. It was the turning point in his life, for while under grandfather's roof, he made, half unconsciously, the choice of his life's work, and learned from, quote, the master, both what he should teach and how it should be taught. When he returned to Edinburgh at the close of the year, a new world was opening out before him, and he was growing into young manhood. That's the end of chapter 5 in this book. I'm very interested to read to you The Talking Wire, the story of Alexander Graham Bell by O.J. Stevenson.